My name is Torgen Johnson. I'm a resident of Long Beach. I'm a father of 3 young children, and I hold 2 graduate degrees in planning from Harvard. I'm here tonight to talk about a very serious public safety issue, which is the San Onofre nuclear generating station. I'd like to start with a quote from a Nobel economist, Joseph Stiglitz, who wrote, "A system that socializes losses and privatizes gains is doomed to mismanaged risk." I want to say that this right here is San Onofre. Del Mar is right here. My home is about here. We fall within this 50-mile evacuation zone, which was prescribed by the U.S. State Department for citizens in Fukushima during the disaster in Fukushima. What I've actually learned recently from interviews and documentaries about the Fukushima disaster was that the Prime Minister, I'll quote him right here, said the worst case scenario was an evacuation of 120 to 160 miles around the plant. If that happened, Tokyo would have ground to a halt. Japan would have ground to a halt. It would have impacted the entire world. So you can imagine the 160-mile radius goes out to Santa Barbara, out to about Yuma, and far below Ensenada. And the reason why I bring that up is what I'm describing to you is the nature of these disasters has been seriously underplayed by the industry. But if we talk about models and using science to determine or anticipate what a disaster is like, I think the best model to use for what happens when a natural disaster impacts a nuclear power plant is to look at a natural disaster impacting a nuclear power plant. And when you look at Fukushima, I think we have the answer. What the answer is that you can have 40 years, great years of operating a nuclear power plant with minimal problems, but you could have one bad day that can ruin an entire country. This right here is a model that was made by a French atmospheric research facility. This is the impact of cesium dispersion, cesium-137 in Japan. The fallout actually wafted across the Pacific. This was part of the loop that doesn't play on this particular system, but it shows it coming across, and it reached California in about 6 days. And when they talk about evacuation, emergency planning evacuation, if you can travel 5,500 miles in 6 days, tell me how emergency planners are going to deal with an emergency at San Onofre. You have 8.4 million people within the 50-mile radius around San Onofre. It's virtually impossible. What they're talking about is impossible. This is what the nuclear fallout looked like around Chernobyl. Up here in Scotland, meat and dairy was banned from export until last year. 25 years it's been banned from export because of contamination of cesium-137 that was uptaken from the grazing animals. This right here shows the dispersion of smoke from our brush fires in California. This is the Mexican border. Here's Lompoc. So we're down in here somewhere. You can see that in a short period of time, particulate travels long distances, actually in all directions. The wind rose for San Onofre shows wind traveling in all directions throughout the year. So if you had a nuclear disaster at San Onofre, nobody would really know what direction that wind is going to take. It's almost equal in all directions. This is the planning document for San Diego County Nuclear Power Plant Emergency Response Plan. This is dated January 2011. There's gaping holes in this plan. I can go through that in more detail. If you agendize this item, we can go through these point by point. They're very serious, potentially fatal oversights in the planning. The main one I would talk about is that in Fukushima, the disaster released hot particles. Fuel fleas are called. If they're inhaled or ingested, they have a high rate of generating cancer in the victims. This is the planning document that's by the Interjurisdictional Planning Committee. This is a nuclear industry publication. The IPC is an organization that coordinates emergency response up in Orange County. I want to say that it's ironic that they portray a child with a painted face on this. The children are the most susceptible to the negative impacts, health impacts of ionizing radiation. Gaping holes also in this document. We can go over those if you agendize this item. They're very serious gaping holes in terms of emergency preparedness and response. The first one is that the key response in a nuclear disaster at San Onofre is to shelter in place. And the reason is because of the speed and the size of the plume. I know, because I have an architectural background, I also have a professional degree in architecture from USC. You can't protect against catastrophic earthquakes in terms of building envelope. So if your primary means of protecting yourself and your family is to shelter in place and seal off doors and windows, you have to hope that the building envelope is not destroyed. This is what happened in an earthquake up in Los Angeles. Also, another key emergency response is to evacuate. Because of the size and speed of the plume, that's almost impossible. Secondly, we learned on September 8th, when San Onofre was shut down by a system, it was actually a station blackout, it was a system grid deficiency. San Onofre shut down in the afternoon, and within just a few hours, we had gridlock all over San Diego. It was impossible to get across Solana Beach. People were reporting 2 hours to get from one end of Solana Beach to the other, 2 miles. How would you evacuate people in a nuclear disaster if it was at San Onofre and we lost power in Southern California? The other thing is emergency responders. We send them into emergencies, but if they have improper information, you could send them into their deaths. And I would say that nuclear disasters, very large ones, and I want to quote right here that the scenario in Fukushima, if people had abandoned the power plant, there was 6 nuclear reactors and 7 spent fuel pools. The Prime Minister said that had the spent fuel pools boiled off and the spent fuel caught fire, it would have released several times the radioactive fallout that Chernobyl did. So if you imagine, right now at San Onofre, the spent fuel pools are quadruple racked. That means they're holding 4 times more spent fuel than they were designed to hold, and they're just a few hundred yards, rather, from the I-5, which is the main north-south artery through California, and the rail line, and the I-15 just to the east. This is a report. This was done by a man who was at Scripps and worked under a man who was known as the father of marine geology. This is a study of paleoseismic features as indicators of earthquake hazard north coastal San Diego County, California. Just very briefly, it says there's tsunami evidence here in North County. It was tested in 600 different sites and road cuts. There's tsunami evidence up to 100 meters above the current margins of the coastal lagoons and estuaries. In other words, we have a history of large tsunamis generated, now they suspect, by the Newport Inglewood Rose Canyon fault that runs 46 kilometers offshore, that they say now is capable of producing earthquakes much larger than they had previously considered. And part of the reason why is they've connected up those two fault systems and realized they're part of the same fault. There were the same types of studies in Fukushima. This one was done by Koji Minora in Japan. For 20 years before the tsunami hit Fukushima, he was warning TEPCO about the risk. He was finding tsunami deposits back 2 miles inside of the rice fields around Fukushima, just like Gerald Kuhn is finding them up around our estuaries. And he warned people, nobody listened. When he was interviewed after the disaster, he said, it's too late. Here's a picture of the seawall at San Onofre, deficiently low. Here's a picture of, if you know Tide Park, this is the lifeguard tower. You've probably never seen it like this. I live just above the lifeguard tower, and I have a camera. Most people don't go down to the beach during the Pacific storms. This lifeguard tower roof is getting splashed, and yet it's 30 feet above the beach. That's just a small storm. That's not a tsunami. The IPC, Edison, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission downplay the health impacts also of a nuclear disaster. This is a Google search. I just put in 3 words: Chernobyl chromosomal aberrations. I got 34,100 citations. Now, if an industry can say that there are no impacts, then why are there so many citations? And these are mostly from, the first ones are mostly from research institutes. Here's an example of one. This is the analysis of genomic instability in the offspring of fathers exposed to low doses of ionizing radiation. In other words, the impacts are transgenerational. I may get exposed, but my unborn child will bear the health impacts from this, my exposure. That's how sinister this particular technology is. And it's even more sinister when it's run by a for-profit corporation that retaliates against the very people that are reporting safety violations. If you've ever run a large technical operation, you need that safety feedback loop. That's how you maintain the safety inside your facility. What these retaliations say to me is that this industry and this company does not see health and safety as their number one priority. And this is a shakeout. This is USGS anticipates a very large earthquake eruption on the South San Andreas. I just want to say that previous article that I showed you, report that I showed you, paleoseismic features in North County, San Diego, states very clearly that the Newport Inglewood Rose Canyon Fault, just offshore of us, 46 kilometers, is a major component of the San Andreas fault system.
Torgen, would you summarize?
Yes. In summary, what I urge the City Council to do is to place this public safety issue on your agenda, as so many other cities within the 50-mile evacuation radius have done. Several have already taken action to write letters to the NRC, Edison, and state agencies demanding that these agencies place public safety first. I hope that you give us the chance to present more information. This is a very brief presentation, but please place public safety first. Thank you. Right now, there's 2 steam generators at Songs that have failed. Steam generator 2 had less damage, but it's exactly the same problem. My concern is that because there was less damage and yet the same problem, that starting up number 2 is going to be any different from starting up number 3, which they don't want to start up yet. So my concern is that the management of Edison is willing to take a huge gamble with our lives and our properties, because you can't insure your property against nuclear fallout, radioactive fallout. It's a small clause on everybody's homeowner's insurance policy. I don't know if you've seen that. And that was thanks to the Price-Anderson Act. The industry was indemnified against major or catastrophic nuclear disasters. And there's a fund of about $13 billion, which was meant to handle any disaster. But if you look at $13 billion in relation to Southern California, land values, property values, infrastructure expenses, and so forth, you're looking at a very small city. And when you look at the size of the disasters we're talking here, what that means is that we all wind up footing the bill for any disaster that exceeds $13 billion. Right now, I think in Japan, the disaster is somewhere around 300 billion and climbing. Germany decided to end their nuclear program because they did calculations, and they ran, because of their density, which is similar to Southern California's, they anticipated that their losses would be around 6 trillion for a nuclear disaster. So I think when we talk about can we make it safe, I would ask the question, why would we want to have a technology producing power that we don't need and risking the 9th largest economy in the world? California is a huge economy. A lot of it's based out of Southern California. I think these are more fundamental questions. So in response here, let's broaden that question and ask the bigger societal question. Is this technology the right technology for boiling water?
I read somewhere in a Wall Street Journal article not too long ago that nuclear energy is on its way out as a power source, and it's not expected to be around very much longer. Do you concur in that appraisal?
I would say that a major nuclear disaster in America would end it that day. But pending that, I would say that the agencies that are set up to gauge the benefit versus the risk to society are mostly run by people who are in the industry, nuclear industry. The CPUC is run by a man named Michael Peavy, who was the previous head of Edison International, Southern California Edison. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission is run by several commissioners, except one who just resigned. The other 4 are from the industry. So if you look at the odds stacked against society to actually do an accurate analysis of the pros and cons of this industry and make a decision to shut down, if that's a decision, I think it's not going to happen. It's going to actually have to happen at the grassroots level, and that's why we're going to city councils, is the upper level state and federal agencies aren't functioning the way they need to.
My question is really a 2-part question. One, given the propensity to try and avoid sunk capital and rescue whatever investment you can rescue, and the factors that may go into that decision, in your opinion, are we likely to see any new nuclear facilities?
There were two facilities that were just granted licenses or permits in Georgia. So I think the industry is pushing very hard, but I think if you look at Japan right now, and you look at Germany, you look at Switzerland, those societies are moving away from nuclear power. So I guess maybe the concern that I would have would be hanging on to a Cold War era failing technology run by Soviet-style bureaucracies that are really regulated monopolies that don't engender competition and innovation. That's more scary to me, basing our entire regional power source on that kind of system as opposed to being more innovative. I think that's a serious misstep, I would say, for our energy policy.
Thank you.